weekly lectionary readings are compiled by representatives from about 20 churches, including the United Church of Canada. They do a listing of prominent Bible texts so that over a period of 3 years, you'll get a reasonably representative sample of the Bible. And usually they do a good job, so there's little to complain about. But for some reason, they chose the opening part of Genesis chapter 18 last week and then skipped right over to Genesis 20 for this week. I don't understand why they chose to skip one of the greatest stories in the entire Bible. Now, admittedly, it's not a super common one, so many folks tend to not remember it, I guess. There's no great bursts of violent action or obvious heroism. There's nothing flashy about this story in the last half of chapter 18, but I do think that it makes an extremely important point about what true spirituality is. And by implication, what it's not. Just before I read it, let me set it up. 2 visitors, angels perhaps, have come to see Abraham. And they've prophesied that he and his wife Sarah will be the foundation of a great people. And for a desert nomad living in a tent, this is fairly hard to believe. But there's no point in arguing with prophets. You either believe or you don't, and the event will either happen or it won't. And as the messengers get up to leave, Abraham extends hospitality by walking with them for a short way to an overlook of the cities of the Jordan Valley. It's a very fertile and strategically key area that happens to be once again in the news right now. And that's when the prophecy takes a darker turn. I'll start reading at Genesis 18, verse 16. The men got up and went over to look down on Sodom. And when the Lord said, "Will I keep from Abraham what I'm about to do? Abraham will certainly become a great nation, and all the earth's nations will be blessed because of him. And I have formed a relationship with him so that he'll instruct his children and his household after him." And then around verse 20, things take a decidedly different turn. The Lord said, "The cries of injustice from Sodom and Gomorrah are countless, and their sin is great. I will go down and weigh the cries of injustice that have reached me." The men turned away, but Abraham remained standing there in front of the Lord. And Abraham said, "Will you really sweep away the innocent with the guilty? What if there are 50 innocent people living in that city? Will you really sweep it away and not save the place for the sake of the 50 innocent people in it? It's not like you to do this, killing the innocent with the guilty as if there were no difference. It's not like you. Will the judge of all the earth not act justly?" And the Lord said, "If I find 50 innocent people in the city of Sodom, I will save it because of them." Abraham responded, "Since I've already decided to speak with my Lord, what if there are 5 fewer innocent people than 50? Will you destroy the whole city over a difference of 5? The Lord said, "If I find 45 people there, I won't destroy it." Once again, Abraham spoke, "What if 40 are there?" The Lord said, "For the sake of 40, I will do nothing." Abraham said, Don't be angry, but what if 30 are there? The Lord said, I won't do it if I find 30 there. Abraham replied, since I've already decided to speak with my Lord, what if only 20 are there? The Lord said, I won't do it for the sake of 20. Abraham said, don't be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. What if there are 10? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it because of those 10. And when the Lord finished speaking with Abraham, he left. But Abraham stayed there in that place. Now, there are many reasons why people dismiss religion. I won't spend too much time on this part because it's not my main point today, but just to run through a few, specifically related to the Christian faith. Some folks have lost interest because they simply no longer believe in God. I think those folks' conception of God is probably too narrow. Some folks don't believe in the stuff that's written in the Bible. They don't believe that it ever happened or that any of it's true. To which I reply that there is truth there, but you'll miss it if you go there expecting to read history or science. Some have given up on religion because they have no interest in forced ritual. Well, okay, I get that. Sometimes it does get a bit ponderous and stagey. But if a certain kind of liturgy doesn't make any connection with you, there are plenty of other styles of group worship to choose from. Another thing that turns people away from religion, and this probably pertains to all religions, is when some other members of the faith group turn out to be jerks. In some cases, probably a stronger word would be more appropriate, but you get the point. How often haven't we all heard that the church has hypocrites and jerks in it? I'm not even going to argue against this because it's 100% true. Because the church is a cross-section of society. So, of course, there are going to be great people involved, as well as some less great ones. And finally, one of the largest groups of people, the largest groupings, these days at least, are those who say that they're still spiritual, but not religious. In other words, don't waste my time with a specific set day when I'm expected to sit down and act in this way and then cough up money to support an institution. I'm a free spirit, man. I find what I need out on the water or out in the woods. Well, I understand this argument too, and I plan on addressing it in an upcoming week. But for now, just let me say that we get something more, something additional from being in community. Now, where I think a lot of these anti-religious arguments all intersect, unfortunately, is exactly where so many churches are right now. You walk into a hushed atmosphere, and everyone seems to walk just a little bit slower than usual. And they use that annoying golf announcer's voice when talking to you. Too often, too much of the music is either dreadfully dull and dreary or some kind of maudlin sentimentalist drivel. And then someone reads something from a dusty book written in barely comprehensible 400-year-old English, as if that particular era of history was super sacred and the language therefore has to be replicated ever afterward. And all too often, this is followed by 20 minutes of someone droning on using pietist cliches, 100 different ways of saying, "Come to Jesus." For too many people, way too many people, either through direct experience or by way of pop culture, that is exactly how church is too often perceived. An hour of hushed whispers and false piety, a place lacking in real life and authenticity that has very little relevance to daily life once people set foot back outside the doors. But for me, what I worry about even more than that is when the hour spent inside the doors isn't even doing anyone much good. And this, including what happens outside, but this is the fault of a shoddy foundation of spiritual focus. All of this walking around with exaggerated slow steps and talking in low tones, it all seems like an act. Like the entire church is just acting the way that they think they should, lest they speak too loudly and wake God up on a Sunday morning. I'm reminded of that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail where the knights are confronted with the cartoon god in the clouds. And they keep bowing and scraping as if they're not worthy. There's way too much of that going on. And also way too much of folks just sitting around waiting for God to magically reach down from those cartoon clouds and do something for us. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. It's up to you to engage in your spiritual life. Look at Abraham. He's just received some rather incredible news that even at his advanced age, he'll still be the founder of great nations. And now, only a few minutes later, he's standing there overlooking the cities of the plain when he hears some truly god-awful news. The cities and all of their inhabitants will be destroyed. I dare say, if it was me, well, first of all, if it was me, I'd still be blown away by the news that the two visitors brought. So I'd probably have to sit down and process that for a while. But assuming I had the mental wherewithal to react at all, I also worry that I would probably play it safe. Not want to anger God. After all, it's not so often that we feel a direct divine presence at all. So why jeopardize that by being too forward? It takes some kind of nerve, I think, the way Abraham goes about engaging with God over the fate of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he didn't just give up easily either. He didn't just get the required number of righteous people down to sort of a manageable 50 and then consider that he'd done his part for humanity. No, he keeps going back and back and back. First, in a small step, bargaining God down to 45 people. And then in larger steps to 40, 30, 20. 10. Bargaining with God. My favorite part of the entire story is when Abraham actually calls out God. He says, "Hey, what are you even thinking? You claim to be a God of justice. So how does that square with all these horrible plans that you have?" Can you imagine? I can't. I can't. Maybe we've been around so much false piety for so long that we can't even imagine what kind of spiritual fortitude would be required to really get into it with God. But was Abraham punished for it? No. Quite the opposite, in fact. In fact, all the great heroes of the faith actively wrestled with God. Jacob did, literally. Moses in that scene on Mount Sinai. Read through some of David's Psalms. Or Elijah in that great story on the top of Mount Carmel near modern-day Haifa. Or Job. Or Jonah. Or Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane. In every instance, the audacity required was immense. And so was the personal effort and ultimate cost. But the spiritual engagement was deep and authentic. If there's one thing I've learned during this COVID time, it's that our spiritual lives are much more important than we've too often considered them to be. And if they're that important, then in the very least, they'd better be real. One of the greatest gifts we can give to ourselves is to be real. Ask fewer hard questions of others and more hard questions of ourselves. And don't be so afraid to confront God directly. Now, that isn't to say, of course, and this is what people come back at you with all the time, this isn't to say that we'll always get the answer we want. Life isn't like that. But in pursuing God, we will almost always get something, and it will be valuable. Spirituality isn't primarily about what group we affiliate with, or about what facts we know, or what we think we know, or what conclusions we draw, or what kind of theology we believe. It's mostly in the questions we're willing to ask, the wrestling we're willing to undertake, the encounters we're willing to risk. It's being engaged. I hope we'll all be able to gather together live, either this upcoming week or next. And let's be honest, now that Michael Enright is done, there's really not much holding you back from coming to church. But when we do gather together once again, let's be sure to do a bit less of the churchy type posturing and maybe take a bit more from Abraham's example.